So I'm going to begin by telling you a very personal story of something that happened in a moment of my life. So it's 10:15 a.m. on a chilly Monday morning in February, and I should be at work, but instead I'm at home in bed. I'm exhausted. I'm emotionally depleted. My body is aching. I have a splitting headache, and I've been crying for the last hour and a half, and I can't stop. And I'm wondering what is wrong with me. And a lot's wrong with me because 2 months before this moment, I had lost my grandma to cancer. And she had been my best friend. And she was the person who took my young son and I into her home when I was a 19-year-old kid trying to make it through college. And 2 months before this moment, I had been on the verge of getting a divorce from my husband. We were actually planning custody arrangements and talking about what it would be like to be separated. And a year and a half before this moment, I had accepted a position where I felt ineffective and I felt alienated, and I felt like I didn't have anything to give. So a lot was wrong with me, but this was something totally different. Without a conscious thought, I picked up my laptop and opened it up, and I typed in symptoms of depression. And I had every single one. So that day I made a phone call to my doctor, and later that day I was diagnosed with major depression and generalized anxiety. So the circumstances in my life had become so overwhelming that I could no longer cope. And there's a lot of shame that comes from moments like these in our lives. And I was feeling that shame. And at the same time, I was not able to maintain the separate selves that we sometimes have. So I know for me personally, I had a professional self who was pretty competent and capable and could put a smile on and sort of look like I knew what I was doing. But then at the same time, I had this personal self who felt ineffective and challenged and self-conscious and depressed and anxious. And because of the tremendous pressure that I was under, those separate selves just collapsed into the same hot mess of a self that I showed to everybody. So what this meant was that when I was in the workplace, I started sharing more of myself than I ever had before. So I started telling my story to other people and talking about my challenges. And what was really surprising about this is that as I told my story, I started hearing other stories back. So I would hear from a woman who was suffering from obsessive compulsive disorder and insomnia, or someone else who had just gone through a divorce because of a husband who was an alcoholic, or maybe someone who had a child who had been diagnosed with cancer and the prognosis was unclear. And before this experience, I had no idea that all of these people were in such tremendous pain that was not at all dissimilar to the pain that I was experiencing. So this was a whole new world that opened up to me of empathy and understanding other people. And it changed the way that I viewed everything, and it changed the way that I interacted with others. So I'm going to pause here for a moment, and I'm going to ask you a question, and it's going to require a little bit of vulnerability, but all you need to do is raise your hand. How many of you can relate to either my story or the story of someone else that I shared? Raise your hand. Raise them high, and then look around the room. So this is called a common humanity intervention. And it's a moment when we recognize that we are not alone. And this is one of the greatest tools for building resilience, is understanding that we don't have the only experience that is like this, that there's a wealth of resources in the people around us, and most of all, that we don't have to be ashamed because of the things that we've been through. So this was one moment amongst many that I experienced, and things were obviously very difficult. And wouldn't it be nice if when we went through these really challenging experiences, like you all just admitted to having, if we thought, I really need to take care of myself right now. I'm going to start eating better. I'm going to make sure I'm going to the gym. I'm going to get good sleep every night. I'm going to have a lot of contact with the folks around me that I care about. Raise your hand if that's what you did in your circumstance. Yeah, me neither. So instead, what I decided to do is I stopped eating and I lost 20 pounds. I started smoking, and I hadn't done that since college. I started drinking too much, and I stopped sleeping. And all of those things did not lead me to be more healthy. Obviously, it's a short-term fix when you pick up that cigarette because you just had a hard conversation, or that drink, or that donut, or any of those things. So I had to find other resources that worked for me. And what I ended up doing was starting a mindfulness practice, becoming more grateful for those little slivers of joy that we all have in every day of our lives. I started reframing the challenges that I was experiencing as instances where I could make meaning from my life in ways that I could grow. And lastly, and most importantly, I started reaching out and connecting with other people. A year later, these are the same tools that I'm teaching to communities, and I'm seeing other people benefit in the same way that I had benefited. And what was really interesting about this is that the individual didn't just become less stressed and more resilient and happier, it changed communities. And those communities became more positive and they became more productive. So this is called psychological safety, and it's created by a combination of trust and empathy in communities that allows individuals to be who they truly are in the space, whatever that space happens to be. Not just in our personal lives, but also in our work worlds and in the other communities that we take a part in. So the question that I want to leave you with is this: what are the pieces? What are the parts that you are hiding away somewhere within yourself because you're not ready to see them, and you certainly don't want anyone else to see them either? And what would happen if you brought those parts into the light and began to share them with the folks around you? I promise you that it will change your life for the better. It will enhance your relationships. But more than anything else, you may even change the worlds that you exist in. Thank you.